We're on. Awesome.
We are here.
Yeah, we're in. Welcome,
Yes.
Pastor Luke Robinson.
Welcome to the
Thank
table.
you for having me along.
Yeah. We've been saying that we've wanted to have you on the show for like years, and
I
it's
was
just
gonna
never
say,
happened.
This is my 4th year in Bundaberg.
Yeah. And I suppose you're blaming us for that.
It's okay.
I invited him.
Yes, thank you, Emerson. You brought him along.
credit.
Uh, So, for people that don't know you, for people who are from elsewhere in the world, can you give us the summary of who you are and where you are and what you do?
Well, I guess what I am now, I'm the minister for St Andrew's Church, which is a Seventh-day Adventist congregation that meets in the centre of Bundaberg. I'm also the chaplain for a lot of young kids
Yeah.
over at Hope Adventist School. And I always say that keeps you lively and young and very energetic, my goodness. But anyway, it's good fun. It is good fun.
So the days you're there, you go home and you sleep really well,
I
right?
sleep very well. But it is good. It is good. And I find too, like Bundaberg in some ways is a little bit of a retirement haven. So, we have the senior element here. And then being at the school as well gives me some of the junior element. And, it brings that, balance to life. So
Yeah.
it's good. It's good.
Oh, now you're here with a couple of sprightly young fellas. So
Yeah.
Very good. Very
getting the
good.
full spectrum.
No, that's awesome. So, you said this is what you're doing right now. I'm always interested in people's stories, right? And so I've heard a little bit of your story before, but maybe for setting that little bit of context, where did you come from? Have you always been a pastor, or did you do something else prior?
No, see, my father was actually a minister, as was my grandfather. But here's the kicker. None of us actually went into the ministry straight up, straight out of school. We all went and did other careers. And God later in life actually called us to the ministry. And I'd always said that to God. It's like, you know what, God, lots of people say to me, you should be a pastor just like your father and your grandfather. It's like, well, only if you want me to do that. And people talk about callings. I actually think callings come for many different occupations, and you see that scripturally in the Bible too. God called craftsmen to build the temple. He calls kings. He calls pastors. You go down the list. And so for 20 years, I spent time as an employee of the federal government. For the last 10 of that, I was working at a director level, and so managed to work with health, disability services, family community services, youth services, employment, workplace relations, a real gamut. Over 20 years, you do rack up a bit of time in different areas. But the part I loved about that was going around the country, because I did have a healthy travel budget, and I would be catching up with communities. And I always say, how do we get the best for people? And the way we get the best for people is when they are empowered to get the best for themselves, but with a cohort of people that are around them to help them with that. So we were trying all sorts of fun things. I'm someone that does like to push the boundaries sometimes and really experiment. And so we were experimenting with government services. People were like, oh, no, that's taxpayer dollars. It's like, well, no, we're getting better bang for your buck. But we were doing some things in 10 communities around the country, for instance, where we were saying, people just say you're government. What they don't realise is there's 3 levels of government. That sometimes makes their life hell. And in fact, that was one of the things we worked out. We called it the meteor shower of government services and interventions. And it's like, how about we do a bit more of a grassroots thing and actually get them around the table, get people working. And the hard part is to not let that turn into some sort of, kumbaya sort of experience where everyone's sitting around the campfire, and actually make it meaningful. The thing that we were playing with, and I think we were actually successful in getting going, is watching that happen. And they had big noble goals depending on where you were. If it was in Burke, they were talking a lot about justice, youth justice and those sort of issues there. In a place like Logan, where I previously was, how do we get our kids 0 to 5 to actually grow up and have the same sort of life expectancy and good economic outcomes as everyone else around the country? So it's some of these spots around the country that might have some dark chapters, but interestingly have now turned some really good pages in their story. So I love that. I used to be a little bit of a change maker. In fact, at one time I was working in the innovation space, and so I was one of the innovation leads for Department of Social Services, for instance. Back when I was in Department of Employment and Education Workplace Relations, again, was in that space as well. We drove the innovation challenge. And so, I like to experiment. I like to,
Very cool.
Play with the data, but meet with people, because that's where it really happens. Yeah.
So interesting. And so many of those skills, just as you were going through them, so many, I'm like, yep, that makes sense in the church context. So does that. So does that. So does that. Yeah.
It very
Really
much is the
interesting.
people business,
Yeah.
working in churches. I know lots of people have lots of ideas about what that is, but it's about people. Obviously, we have God that's the head of that, or should be.
Yes.
And so, you know, how do we work together? And how I always say this, you know, we talk about the social uplift. How do we get that social uplift happening with people? Spiritual uplift that goes with it, and all the other things too.
Yeah.
So,
So interesting. Well, the topic that we're actually coming to tonight to discuss together, it comes directly from the mind of Emerson. So do you want to tell us about it?
Yeah, well, I think last time or the time before that we recorded, no, it was last time we recorded, I sort of said this phrase passingly, but I said, ideology, idolatry. And that whole idea sort of stuck with me, and I've been thinking about it a lot lately. And I've started writing a bit of a sermon for it for like a week and a half's time. But the concept is, because I've been seeing it having a lot in the world around us, where what are people's idols become today? You know, because when I grew up, it was like sports stars and singers and actors was much more of a big deal, and that's sort of fading off, and people are getting much more invested in their idolatry. In their ideology. See, this is a confusing topic title. And their worldview is becoming their god. You know, as people are getting more and more separated in their beliefs and their ideas, be it because of the algorithms or whatever you want to blame it on. But people are getting really, really invested in their worldviews, and their worldviews and their ideology is becoming infallible in their own mind, and they're treating it like it's their god, and so it's become idolatry. You know, that's become their idol.
So we've moved from this, like Australian Idol, where we're sort of worshipping someone else.
Yeah.
You know, they're really high and great, to almost a little bit of self-worship, because that's what I think.
Yep. Yeah. Well, it's what I think, and in a religious context, it's, you know, there's us. We are the ones who believe that this is what is right, and anyone who agrees with me is right and is with me, and it's us against everyone who's wrong. You know, and then someone will try and challenge you on that. You know, I think I've mentioned on this podcast, I've been watching a lot of the abortion debates from the guys over in the States. They call themselves the abolitionists, and they just debate people on the street about abortion, right? And you see these people, and they come up and they start talking to these guys, and you know, these guys, all they do is advocate against abortion. And so they're very good at it, you know, and so they have very practiced and very well-rounded arguments. And they hit these people with very good arguments that are just like, you can't argue against these points that they're making. And they shut down, they start screaming, they start insulting, because they're this ideology that they have, that abortion is good, that's infallible to them. And if you, like, it can't be wrong, you know? They're just like, I can't be wrong. And so they just break down and fall apart, you know, as I imagine the prophets of Baal did on Mount Carmel, when they started screaming and yelling and cutting themselves, you know?
Do you think it kind of goes the other way too, though? You know, if you become...
It goes all of the ways. This is the crazy thing. It goes every direction.
In that sort of sense. It's like, do we need to be able to listen and reason with each other in that sort of sense?
Wouldn't that be a revolutionary idea?
Like, who would have thought?
Yeah.
But this is the thing, you know, where we don't give an opportunity for someone else to speak, and we're not listening, then very quickly, well, who's the focus? Well, it's the one who's talking, whoever that is, you know, one side or the other side. And so you almost fall into this sort of idea that you're talking about, you know.
Yeah.
Ideology, Now you've given it to me. Ideology, idolatry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But this is the thing, where do we have all the points on this? However right or wrong we might be on something. Yeah,
But this is not, and you said there's these waves, right? When we were young, it was like, oh, pop stars and sporting stars, whatever. And now it's more so these ideological echo chambers. And yeah, I think you're right. I think there is an element of the algorithms and social media that pushes people in those directions. I think that's absolutely a part of it. I'm just trying to kill a mosquito. I'm not trying to punch you in the face.
I got him.
Well done. For those people who are just listening to this, that would have been a really confusing moment. And whilst that's true, this problem of ideologies has not been a new thing, right? I was thinking about this afternoon, actually. I was thinking about, in the time of Jesus, the overarching philosophies or ideologies that were present in that area at the time. You had the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Essenes, the Zealots. They had found their own ways of reconciling the state that Israel was in and how they were going to respond to that. And so no matter how you cut it, the Zealots were always going to think this is time for a military takeover. And it didn't matter how you cut it, the Pharisees are always going to try to out-righteous the other guy in order to get to God's favor. And so they all had their own ways of approaching those things. And I wasn't there, I don't know, but I would assume that there were very few people that converted from one ideology to another. Whilst I'm sure it happened, I don't think it would have been a common thing. But when you get into those echo chambers, right, you get to that place like you were describing where I can't be wrong. There's no possible way for me to be wrong, or my group, my tribe to be wrong. And so therefore I'm just going to double down. Every time there's doubt, I'm just going to double down on it. It's a very human thing.
Well, it is a very human thing. Like psychologically, the way we develop our beliefs, they're pretty core to who we are. And it takes time for us to get to that point. You think as children you're raised and you tend to pick up whatever the ideology is of your parents. Maybe there's some other significant people in your life that also influence, whether it's teachers or, it might be the sports coach, all of a sudden you're online with however he approaches things. But you get to this point, and particularly as you approach adulthood, you've really started to form your beliefs, and this is what is right and wrong according to what you think.
Yeah.
And so you start to guard because you begin to notice, hang on, when I step outside the sheltered world of my own family home or wherever it might have been, there's a whole lot of other beliefs that are floating around out there. And so naturally you go on the defensive. And so people's first reaction then to deal with a different belief system, a different ideology is attack.
Yeah.
And it's their way of defending for themselves as well. And it becomes this question, how flexible are we with our own beliefs? Well, we don't tend to be. Most people don't, because otherwise, you end up with a pretty messed up existence. And I always think this is sort of some of that balance that comes into it. Yes, we need to sort of protect the own, my own personal identity and who I am and those sort of things. But at the same time, how can I be open to new ideas? Because those new ideas might be really beneficial to me too. And this is where I know as a pastor, it's one of the big things. We're talking with people and particularly in a post-Christian, Western world that we're in now. This idea of Jesus is now a minority idea. How do we have those conversations? I laugh about this because I remember growing up, people say, "Oh, Adam and Eve," and even man on the street would know that. But I still remember this is about 7 years ago. We were talking with a teenager from a high school, and it's like, "Oh, Adam and Eve," and he's like, "Oh, who are they?" Yeah, I know. And you might take that for granted if you come from a Christian background, the first human parents, so to speak. But for people that haven't grown up in that paradigm, that's new. That's different information. I hadn't heard that before. I laugh because, if I put my science hat on, they talk about a mitochondrial Eve and a chromosomal Adam. Because obviously the Y chromosome's got to come from the male line somewhere up the line.
Yeah.
And so those sort of concepts do sort of exist in an evolutionary paradigm as well. But, the story that goes with that's very different.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. But that's for the same reason though, right? Exactly what we're talking about now. The ideology that's associated with, well, I live in a world that's purely materialistic means that I can't have any kind of an assent to God being the originator of life.
Well, it's that paradigm that you're working with. Is it really just the bricks and mortar around me?
Mm-hmm.
Is it just the things I can see, taste, feel, touch,
Mm-hmm.
or is there something that is intangible that I interact with? I obviously, as a pastor, I say, of course, there's a God, there's a supernatural world out there. I always find this fascinating when you're looking at the statistics. While we used to say the latest generation, Gen Z, coming through, obviously Gen Alphas.
Yeah, I was going to say, they're not latest anymore.
They're not anymore. And the Alphas are only just starting to get old enough to start asking, what do they really think?
Yeah.
But Gen Z's the ones that we've got a lot more research on. They probably have the least interest in things like organized religion, those belief structures, and particularly institutional structures that are associated with church. And yet they're also, of the generations, probably the most likely to report interaction with the supernatural, funnily enough.
Yeah.
There's an American study that come out. It made me wonder, how or what. But think about it for a few seconds, guys. If you look at what goes up on, movie theaters and in the streaming and all those sorts of things, there's a lot of,
Very spiritually charged.
Spiritually charged stuff, whether it's talking about vampires or whether it's talking about, was it K-pop, Demon Slayers, and all these other sorts of ones that are getting around. People here interact with that. Maybe it's not in the God sense, but it's certainly still in the spiritual sense. And so a lot of them are actually reporting interactions in that space too. What that says to me, though, is not that we're necessarily becoming atheistic even as a society. That's not really what that's about. Rather, what it seems to be doing is actually challenging perhaps a status quo. And it's driving at, you interpret things that way because that's your ideology. But we want to look at those facts, interpret them the way that we want to interpret them. And this suits me.
But it's a good point on the atheist point too, because their ideology is God doesn't exist, right? That's the basis of it, and they'll come up with anything to fit that and to make sure that that's true and that it's reasonable in their own head. And so they come up with these ideas like evolution, and they write it in books and they put it down, and no matter how much they do, it just doesn't make sense, But in their heads, they're like, it makes sense because it has to make sense. Because if it doesn't make sense, then we're wrong. And we cannot be wrong,
Yeah. And of course, if someone's listening to us today, they could be within their rights to say, well, Christians do the same thing, right? And we do. This is the point that I'm getting at. Like, I have heard some of the worst defenses of the Christian faith from people that believe it so strongly, but they are purely responding to it from a perspective of, I can't be wrong, therefore I'm going to attack this thought, this idea, this structure. And I've had conversations with people before who believe in evolution in like the deep time sense. And one of the things that I've found really interesting in those conversations is that we both tend to point to the same things, right? See, this proves that God created the world in recent history, and they're like, no, that same thing proves that God didn't have anything to do with it. We all have the same data. Everyone in the world has access to the same data, effectively. The difference is, what lens do we apply to that data? And I think this comes into what you were saying about worldview, right?
That's right. We interpret it to fit what we already hope to be true.
Yes, we're stacking things around the worldview that we have. We're not willing to shift it. And something that, I was just going to say, Pastor Luke, you were saying earlier about when you come out of your family of origin, you have this structure of, I believe what they believed. But the people who are most likely to change their worldview are those young people, right? Because they have that degree of openness. Would you say?
Yeah, they can be, because I think in many ways it's a new world.
Yeah.
It's a brave new world, and you're making sense of what's around you. Interestingly, from a pastoral perspective, we find often people are more likely to try something new when there's been a major change in their life. And we talk about life stages. So being young, often that means you've moved out of home, and so you're setting your own. What does my world look like now?
Yeah.
And that might be, do I live in a house? Do I have flatmates, or am I going to go alone? Whatever that might be. Good luck affording that alone. But
especially these days.
yeah. But this is the thing, you look at it when people have children, that begs a whole lot of questions. What school are we going to send them to? Are we going to go to a church or not? What sort of cultural groups are we going to mingle with? Because sometimes people have got those sort of backgrounds. If you come from the Pacific Islands, there's a very distinct way that you're going to do things. If you come from Latin America, you go around the world, everyone's got those sort of traditions. And people, interestingly, when they experience this, they ask anew, how am I going to do this? What do I want to do with this? And let's be very honest. And if we want to come back to the core question, why am I so entrenched in my own ideology? Well, it benefits me. If you want to go back, a few thousand years to when people might have, melted these forms and built up these, whether it's stone statues or golden idols, whatever it is.
Yeah.
They believed it would actually have some benefit to them. We talk about fertility cults and those sorts of things. My crops will be more bountiful. My family will be more full. All these sorts of things. I don't think it's any different now. It's the same sort of need. We want to succeed. And if we think that my particular way of approaching it is going to help me hit that more frequently, then you're going to pursue that.
Yeah. I think there's one other thing as well, because when I was younger, I was much more, I would say open in some ways. I think in some ways I'm more open now, but what I mean by open is if someone came to me and said, well, I believe this, and it was dramatically different to what I thought, I would give them the benefit of the doubt, and I'd be like, okay, let me have a look at that. And I would spend time, I would research it and go as deep as I could and go, I understand. And do I accept it or do I reject it? I'm going to accept it. I clearly remember even within the church, in the church that I was in, there was some competing viewpoints, right, as to how the Bible should be viewed and interpreted. And I remember that was kind of my first expedition into a contentious biblical topic that I had to come to my own, conclusion of, which was a really formative experience. After that process, though, when you get older, you get married, you have kids. Now, I would love to still be that open to those kind of discussions, but now when people bring things to me that I don't have as much familiarity with, I would love to spend the time to do that, but I don't have that amount of energy in me to go, I'm going to spend 30 hours on this.
And this is the truth. We approach, I call it the greenfield space. This is the first time I've experienced this. I'm willing to sort of take that on. I guess, we talked about the two growing ones when you're young, when you have kids. But when we also look at other times in someone's life stages, when they are open to other ideas, it tends to be in times of great loss.
Yeah.
And why is that? The things that I had no longer help me in this current situation. The system's broken is essentially what it is. Or there's parts of me that are broken. And that's where people go looking for meaning, new ideas, a change. And so often those are other touch points, and so they can come later in life. So you're quite right. How we got to that point is different. Earlier in life, it's a bit of a newness thing. Later in life, it's actually these things aren't working for me now like they used to. So what do I need to do differently now to be prepared for that?
In my own experience, just listening to what you were saying about, I find the opposite. Like when I was younger, the way I was raised in my mind was I was raised in everything that I was taught was true. And, from almost my entire life, I've advocated and argued for the vegetarian diet, right? And all the while I was unhealthy, and I couldn't be wrong on it. Vegetarian is the only way, and there's zero benefit from eating meat. But recently I've gone, man, I'm unhealthy. I need to look into changing my diet. And so I did some research, and everything said, like, you need to eat meat. And I was like, it can't be true. And so I tried it, and it was true. And now I feel way better, and I'm more healthy for it. And I don't know, I think more recently I've become more open. Maybe it was the way I was raised, but I'm opening up more now than I ever have. But I was also thinking in that line, I just brought up this verse in Matthew 18, verse 3, where Jesus says, "Assuredly I say to you, unless you are converted and become as little children, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven." And I'm thinking about like my kids, like they 100% believe in God. And is their faith in God stronger than mine? And I would say, yeah, it is. Because I told them that God is real and they believe me, right? And I'm like, well, why should we become like little children in that? I it's bouncing around in my head because I'm like, we can't just go, well, someone told me God is real, so therefore he has to be real. But it works for the little children, right?
Yeah.
And as we get older, I've been noticing people, they look to the older generations for their wisdom, but often the older generations are more stuck in their ways than anyone, and you can't find any wisdom there because they're more trapped in their worldview than any other demographic.
Not all of them, though, right?
Not all of them, but I find the ones that are trapped in their worldview, if they're older, they're more trapped in their worldview than if they're younger.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, that's a fair statement.
So, yeah, I don't know. But the interesting thing is, and going back to what you had said when we first started the discussion, where this idea sort of goes in every direction you look at it. When I first mentioned this topic to my wife, the first place she went to was the heavy sevies, the hardcore, like conservative Adventist sort of world that she grew up in, where it's like, you have these people where you can say, they'll say to you in one sentence, God loves you so much, he just wants to see you in heaven. He'll do anything he can to save you. And you say, okay, cool. What if I wear jewelry and makeup to church? And they'll say, well, you'll burn in hell, Like, like they don't say that, but that's, the type of people I'm talking about. And the first place her mind was like, yeah, they've got that idolatry. And I'm like, wow, you're right. Like it really does go in every direction.
And I think that there's, I was thinking about idolatry just as a concept, right? And the Bible talks about this in Romans, where it talks about, at the end of the day, idolatry is the worship of things that we've made with our own hands, right? It's not, it's putting something on the throne that is not God, and typically it's something of our own construction, and therefore we're worshiping ourselves as the creator of the thing that we're worshiping. And when you go back and you think of some of the clear and blatant examples, right? I just turned it back to my Bible here, Exodus 32, the golden calf,
yep.
right? In that scenario, if you look at their worship of their own worldview, had they had an experience with God at this point?
Multiple.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. He had just saved them and miraculously delivered them from their oppressors. But as much as they were taken out of Egypt, they still carried an awful lot of Egypt in their hearts. And so they were, defaulting back to something that they knew well here. Moses is up the mountain. He's not returning. And, Aaron's hilarious in this story, by the way, when he's like, he makes it almost sound like he tripped over and spilled the gold, and it was a calf.
He was an evolutionist.
Yeah.
The calf of old.
Yeah. But the point that I'm getting at here is that they devolved back to the place where they were worshipping the work of their own hands yet again. And I think if we come to today and we think of these ideologies, and there's many of them, but like I guess the things that spring to mind, in one sense, there's the political ideologies, be that communism, socialism, capitalism, like whatever the ism you choose, has the capacity to be that, right? Because it's a human construct, and whether you are right or wrong about how it's applied, it's still a human construct. And if you're using it as a replacement, something that you're going to find salvation by capitalism or salvation by socialism or
tradition.
Tradition. There's another one and that works in the political space, in the social space, in the church space. if you go fully into the church space, well, then that comes back to what you were talking about, right? Like conservative fundamentalism as a rubric for governing your existence. Also, man-made structures, but also radical progressive ideology where you can't acknowledge on either end. You're
There
saying
is no truth.
yeah, there is no truth, right? At either end of any of those spectrums, you're denying the fact that there's a holy tension in Scripture. God presents this tension between the poles of so many different topics, and he exists in that tension, right? And he's comfortable with the fact there is tension, and we have to wrestle with it. But anyone who wants to get to the extremes in any of these directions, they're going to fall off the path. So anyway, that's my rant. I'll stop right there.
And the crazy thing about about idolatry is the more you argue against an idolatry, the more an ideology. Fire, it's confusing. The more you argue against an ideology, the more it catches like wind.
Yeah. You're validating it by arguing with it.
By giving it airtime. You know.
We do live in an echo chamber these days. You think we talk about the social media that's out there and those things that are happening. And the algorithms feed you more. In fact, they deliberately feed you more extreme because that
gets you coming back.
It gets you coming back either to fight it because now it's pushing your buttons and you're like, no, that's wrong. And,
Or you engage with it.
While you engage further with it. Or, you feed it and it's like, whoa, really? Wow. And you keep diving deeper into it.
Yes.
And so this is the thing. We have almost automated our dopamine systems
Yeah.
to keep rewarding, going out more and more on a limb on this sort of stuff. It does make me think, though, is there some sort of mediating influence that we've got that helps bring people back from the edge of that?
It's a great question. And I think God is going to be the only answer to this, but I'm curious, are there any intermediary steps that you're referring to, or is this the gospel is just the antidote?
Well,
full stop.
Obviously, being a minister,
I'm going to allow you the easy answer here if you want to take it.
Well, that's it. I do think it's there, but some people say to me, Luke, that's not intellectually honest. And is it a cop out just to say, yeah, I'll put it all in Jesus' hands and now it's a slam dunk and away we walk, sort of thing? Because people will still say, all right, so you accepted Jesus. He said his way is the way. And now you're going to follow him. But what is that again? If we look at Christianity, for instance, over the next, 2,000 years from when Jesus walks the earth and then the church grows from there, we end up with how many denominations these days?
Yeah, hundreds.
And so they would say that, all right, so you say Jesus is the answer, like a good evangelical. And then which answer are you giving me again? Sorry, I missed it. I misunderstood that. And I think this is where there does have to be a little bit of intellectual honesty as well with it. Perhaps, and this is where I sort of, and I've been thinking about this, you go back to the beginning. I firmly believe that what you see unfold through all of human history takes its cues from what happened in the beginning. Obviously, as a Christian, a Bible-believing Christian, I look at the first chapter of Genesis, we see a God who brings order to things. Out of chaos, out of nothing, he brings order, perfection, and life. And then after that, interestingly, we cap out that week with him actually using some of his sovereignty to say, I'm going to designate a day when we rest. And we talk about what that is. It's time together, time with God, acknowledging his sovereignty and many other things. Interestingly, though, he also uses the word blessing. Now, remember what I said before about why do people love their ideology? Because it's useful to them. We like to be profitable in what we do. And so thinking then about what God has done here in the beginning, he's given us blessings. So if he is the source of blessing, maybe he is the one to actually pursue. And people might say, where's the honesty in that? Well, who keeps proving himself time and again? We've got a lot of human history. I know capitalists might point to the last few hundred years. You've got some systems that go deeper than that. I always say, well, look at God. He's actually been around the longest, and he's got this worked out. And the times when we've challenged that, that's when it's not worked out. You look at Genesis 3. And I love how it starts in verse 1 there, now the serpent was more cunning than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. It talks about this idea of cunning. And remember what I was saying before, people pulled up the walls around their ideologies, around their beliefs to protect themselves. And yet here's this seed that's been planted in their thinking, call it an inception moment.
Yeah.
It gets in there. And he says, yes, God said there's some things that you can't do. And people always love being told that there's something that they can't do.
Oh, of course they do.
Because what do we want to do? Well, we're going to do it.
Yeah. Forbidden fruit syndrome.
Well, this is it. And, and she goes, we can eat of everything in the garden, but not that tree of the knowledge of good and evil and those sorts of things. And, if we eat it, we're going to die and it'll be bad news. And what is, the serpent, and for those that might not have heard the story before, the serpent essentially taking this devilish character. And this is where he says this, well, you know what? You're not going to die. In fact, I'm going to say something much better than that. He says, for God knows that in the day you eat of it, your eyes will be open. You'll be like God, knowing good and evil. Now, interpret that as you want. But the way Eve internalizes that, I think, tells a bit more of the story. So like it says in that next verse there is, when the woman saw the tree was good for food, pleasant to the eyes, and it was desirable to make one wise. Well, that's when she took the fruit and ate. She switched paradigms right there.
Yeah.
Her ideology switched. She went from going, I'm going to trust what God's saying. Actually, now I'm going to trust someone else and what they're saying. And I think it's beneficial. Why? Well, we see the three reasons. Good for food. I call it the essentials of life. Everyone's heard of, Maslow's hierarchy of needs and those sort of things. And let's face it, he was not too bad there. There's a bit of social research that's come out. He forgot this idea of relationships. People will prioritize relationships even over the basics of life sometimes. But even so, essentials. So, good for food. What's the next one? Well, it talks about pleasant to the eyes. People love,
Beauty.
does this look good? And it's not just necessarily the beauty. I call it the fame element. There's so many ways you could interpret this. But,
Attraction.
Status.
that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's pretty deeply moving for people. How many people go out and say, why did you do that? Well, I did it because I knew it would make me a big shot.
Yeah.
This was going to be my defining moment. And then the third one that's mentioned here is, the tree is desirable to make one wise. And as he said, you'll be like God. And this, I think, comes back to the question you're raising there. When does an ideology become more of an idol? Well, we would argue when it takes the place of God or a God, depending on what you believe. But this is the thing, if it becomes the top dog in the way that you approach things, and in this case, I would actually argue Eve has fallen for that single point of, I'm betting on myself here. I'm going to be like God. I'm going to know all the things I need to know, have the things I want, meet all my basic needs.
Well, the lie that Satan told her, the lie that the snake told her, was multifaceted, right? Like, yes, he was offering her something that sounded good that she needed, but wrapped up in that whole conversation is the assumption that God is holding something back that would fundamentally be good for you, and so therefore you need to look after yourself. It needs to be a me game, right? Yeah,
And when he says you shall not surely die, there's a lot in that, because the only being that cannot die is God. And if you say, if the lie that Satan says to us is that the soul is immortal, you cannot die, then he's essentially saying you are already like God, and he's afraid of you. He's afraid of your knowledge. He's saying you are a God. So he's giving her that little nudge, like no, it's all in you.
He's giving her the paradigm she needs to feel empowered to do that.
That's right.
And this is the key. And so if you want to look at any of the ideologies that people have today of any spectrum, do they feel empowered, to take that step and make that choice that they're wanting to do? And this is the key.
It all comes back to pride, doesn't it? It all comes back to pride.
It factors, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It does factor.
Well, let me ask a question then. We've done, I think, in this conversation, we've done a fair job of pointing out what's wrong with identifying with an extreme ideology in any particular way. What I feel we haven't done, and is perhaps less clear, is how do we know if we've picked the right one, and how do we know if we've gone off the rails with it?
Yeah, all right, here we go. So, trust and obey, right? God. Because if you believe that God is the only infallible source of truth and perfection, then just keep your eyes fixed on him, trust and obey God. And how do we fight bad ideology? Do we argue against it? No, you and this is the track I was trying to go down before, but you cannot fight an ideology by arguing against that ideology. The only way to fight bad ideology is better ideology, right?
Yeah.
And if we know that God is the only source of truth, and he's the only place that truth comes from, in fact, he is truth, right? Jesus says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life, right? Then he's the only answer, and he's the only source.
Okay, well, okay, hold on. Just bear with me for a second.
Yes.
What about the people that you identified earlier as heavy seppies? They would say they fully agree with you. So how can people like self identify if they have fallen off one side of the continuum or the other?
Can you listen to someone else? Like,
this is an interesting rubric.
Can you comfortably listen to anyone about anything?
Well, God elects, ministers, but I don't think that, I think the heavy savers are saved. I don't think that these things are salvational issues, and I think that God reaches people in different ways, depending on what those people are, and with different variations on the same ideology. And I've said this before on this podcast, but the heavy sevies, I've been to their camps, and you feel the power of the Holy Spirit moving amongst them, and it's powerful and it's beautiful and it's a wonderful thing. And then you go the complete opposite end of the spectrum, and there's people on fire for God there, and you feel the power of the Holy Spirit moving amongst them. And so it just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Don't get hung up on it,
Well, then I guess, to circle back and come back to what I was trying to say before in a minute,
obviously,
then what's your problem with
ideology
then, if you're saying it doesn't matter what you subscribe to?
It's when that becomes your God. It's when you, instead of viewing everything you see should be viewed through the lens of God, right? But when everything you see gets viewed through the lens of your ideas, your ideology, then that becomes your God, right?
Yeah, I still think I don't disagree with the basic premise, but I think there is a leap in logic somewhere. As you said yourself, you're preparing this for a sermon. I think there's, for all of us collectively, I think there's some leaps that need to occur, and maybe that's by design. Maybe we need faith, and therefore there needs to be some leap that where we can't make the clear step, and we have to make the step of faith to get to the place where we're saying exactly what you're saying right there. Because what I'm thinking here is that if we are saying that the claim that you're making is one of absolute truth, right? Like, so if God is the one that has absolute truth, the only right mechanism upon which to grade what we're observing and where we are on any particular axis is based on His word, and that's fine.
God doesn't give us the answer to every question. The Bible doesn't give us the answer to every question. So therefore, not every question has to have a right answer. Right?
Yeah. But the question...
A lot of questions don't matter.
There is a challenge that comes from that, though. And this is probably the practical element. Like, I remember when you started with, how do we do this? We trust and obey. For people that are coming from, I'll say, a no base, which is, the majority of Australians now, if they're coming from a no base of have no knowledge of God,
How do they get there?
Yeah,
Mm.
and that was going to be my question: is how do you get there?
That's a good
And this
question.
comes back to your leap of faith statement. I think you sort of articulating that.
Mm.
That's a long way to travel.
Mm.
In fact, it's probably too much to ask of someone to travel that far in one step.
Mm.
It would take a God moment, I think, for them to go from no faith to trust and obey.
Mm.
And so, you know,
Well, trust and obey is what I'm working on.
Yeah.
Right.
But what are some of those intermediary steps that get people further along that sort of path? You think of Jesus and his way of talking with people, and you know, how many completely non-Jews did he talk to? In other words, people that had no knowledge of his God.
Mm.
There's a handful that he dealt with. You know, the Syro-Phoenician woman was one. You know, modern day Lebanon, if you want to put it that way.
Yeah.
There's some that are, I'll call it, marginally attached. You know, have some knowledge of that. And so, if you think of him talking with the
Woman at the well.
In Samaria, so different belief structure, kind of have the same Bible, but you know, a lot different actually
Kind of, sorta.
as well. And so there's some of those sort of things coming through. He takes people on a journey. He doesn't get to trust and obey until quite late in the piece. And that's because he's got to establish some credibility. And I think this starts to come back towards where I think we've got to go. You know, how did Eve know that she was on the wrong path? Well, she didn't immediately. It wasn't until a little bit later on that you start seeing some of these words like shame pop up. Because initially it was actually exhilaration is really what you'd sum it up. Yeah, you know, I scored a winner here. And, you know, later on as they start to see things die and that sort of stuff when they've never observed that before, in Jesus' language, he says, you know, by their fruits you'll know them. What's the outcome, the later outcome from this sort of stuff? And if I go back through ideology that you've observed in history, this is why I love history so much. I can see the ideas that people kick around now. Oh, have we tried this before somewhere in humanity? And in another day and age, perhaps. All right, maybe the circumstance might have been different, but I'm sure we can learn something from that. And inevitably we have. You know, it might be different permutation, but it's similar enough to draw some conclusions from it.
Yeah.
And this is where people look back and say, you know, even this idea of modernism, you know, through science and advancement, we can conquer the world, and
Yes, all things are
humanity
possible.
will just keep getting better and better, and these sorts of things. And then we had the world wars, where all our advancements actually seemed to be used against one another, and we ended up with a bigger mess.
Yeah.
And you know, a truly world war, and developing things like nuclear warheads that can actually wipe out life on Earth. It's like, well, hang on, that ideology didn't get us quite where we expected it to go. We lived with, you know, the results of that. And we go through different schemes, different worldviews, and how that pans out. And that's why I like that Jesus principle. You know, by their fruit you'll know them. What's the end result of this? And I think for people to be able to, you know, intellectually, honestly approach God and be able to weigh him up with the ideology, they've actually got to say, well, show me some evidence. You know, how is this a better system? You know, what does that look like? And
That's what we come in.
well, this is the thing. I think that too. You know, it's hard for me to say what's good for you because I'm not you. But I can say what has worked for me.
Yeah.
And interestingly, when you look at, again, demographic research, which is something I love to do.
Nerd.
Yes.
In the best possible way.
Yeah. But, you know, I love this about Gen Z is that they very much love the relational. You know, millennials, boomers, all of those sort of guys. It's like, what do you mean you're listening to an influencer on social media? Why are you doing that? But good influencers, not the ones that are, I call them canned spam. But anyway, but they talk about their genuine experience with doing things. And this is what it's done for me. And that's why that appeals to Gen Z. I say Gen Z. The truth is it appeals to everyone.
Yeah.
If it's in that.
But they just prioritize it and are more vocal about it.
That's it. That's it. And it's these sorts of things. You know, people have to work out what works for them. And obviously in a now culture, which is what we're in, we're also in a very individualized culture. You know, things are atomized. We're not really a social network so much as a country anymore, for instance.
Yeah.
You know, it's almost like 26 million data points.
Yes.
And we sort of look for the trend, and that's what we call Australia. But, you know, from that sort of perspective, and I might almost be tempted to say, is that what Christianity looks like to people now? And because
Yeah.
That ideology spread us out so far. Let's be honest, with all the different denominations and everything else, it looks a little nebulous, doesn't
Yeah.
it? You know,
Yeah, I'm actually more. I was reflecting on this not that long ago. I've got a good friend of mine lives just down the road. His name's Oscar, and he's not a Christian, but I am like ideologically closer to him than some people who are a part of my church because of the way he approaches the world, his family values, or whatever. We were having this conversation because he says to me that he wants to live in a country. He's not originally from Australia. He said he wants to live in a country that has Christian values. That's the way the world should operate, even though he's not himself a Christian.
interesting.
Right. And we have to actually, they often listen to the podcast. They may be listening to this. If so, Emily, Oscar, hi guys. But yeah, we have these conversations. It's so interesting. And I've said to them on more than one occasion, it's so interesting how closely aligned we are, despite the fact that we don't have the same faith structure. But it's I think it's so interesting. Like you say, it's those are we disconnected and nebulous and like these data points where I actually don't have that much in common with someone else who proclaims the same faith that I do, and it shouldn't necessarily be that way. That's not the way I think Jesus designed that the church should end up.
Yeah, and I think you're starting to hit on something here. How do people know? Because we said, all right, God's the one that is not an idol. God, Jehovah, King of the universe, whatever you want to call him. But how do we know that we're on the right path? And we've got this wonderful thing called the Bible. Why do I love it? Well, it's had to stand the test of time for the last 4,500 years. That's one thing. So it's given itself the ability to show, well, what are the results of following it? And I know people can point to things here, there, and whatever. But in the main, standing up.
I think the key point that you're making there is that if you're looking at the fruit of the Bible, people will often say, but wars are fought over it and all the rest of it. The only problems come when people that claim to be Christians are acting out of harmony with what's in the Bible. The problem is not when people are actually applying the Bible, right? Yeah. And I think that's a big difference when you're comparing this to other ways.
And also not nearly as many wars have been started by Christians that people like to claim.
Yeah.
It's a big claim that people make, and it's not that true.
I come to another claim that comes out of the Bible too, and it talks about this. Things are meant to be a blessing for all, and not just for some. We see that again and again. If we want to say with the Jews, they're called God's special people. We see that a lot in there. And yet, if I think of the father of all that, Abraham, this character you find in Genesis 12, the thing that's said to him is, I'm going to bless you, but everybody's going to be blessed through you as well. And so where that breaks down, well, that's where we're drifting away, I think, from some of the ideology into whether it's a pride ideology. We see that happen in a lot of cultures. And I think in many ways the stories we read in the Bible are a little bit about that. People have stepped outside into a bit of a nationalistic fervor. Hang on, that's looking familiar right now in the world.
Yeah, we're seeing it.
We're seeing that nationalistic fervor really pop up again. And so, there's some things here which I think if we are honest about it, and this is probably my biggest challenge, is we call about this ideology idol. It's a very self-driven thing. And yet a story that I see very much in Scripture is it's more of a communal, it talks and uses this word of body. People are connected. We actually need each other.
Yeah.
And perhaps the need there too isn't just, I determine what I believe. It's working with others together. What do we believe on that? Now that's a thought. Paul, one of the big kickstarters of the New Testament church.
Yeah.
Christianity as we know it. He talks about, this body of Christ. Jesus is the head. Why is that? Well, that's his example, because let's face it, as humans, we need to follow an example. We need to see it with our own eyes to know what that looks like. And then after that, though, everyone else, he gives this example, some of the hands, some of the feet, some of the eyes. We all have different roles. We're not going to actually be able to experience life unless we're doing it together. And I like this idea because when we do things together, I have to be able to, I almost call it, give up a little bit of me. But in return, I've also got the benefit of the whole, which is bigger than me.
Yeah.
To express that differently, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts.
Yes.
And I think this is something that we're probably missing a lot in Western ideology right now.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Some other cultures have still got that. They appreciate it. Obviously, they've got other things that they're grappling with. But this is, in some ways, I almost see that as a little bit of an antidote to this ideology that's turning into an idol for a lot of people. Instead of lifting up self, actually, let's bring in the bigger picture. Let's bring in others into that.
Yeah. Well, I think this has been really an interesting discussion. I just want to, like, if there's anything anyone else wants to throw in to get us there. But one of the things that's really stood out to me from this is, as I said, I think we spent a fair bit of time identifying the problems. But I really appreciate what you were just sharing about the antidote being the evidence, seeing the fruit, and people having the opportunity to test that out, see the effects that following scripture has, and then people can get to the trust and obey place, right? That they have that experience with God. And Clifford Goldstein is he's an author and a speaker, and and he said something once that when I heard it, it sort of snapped my attention really, really quick. I was like, whoa, what did he just say? And he said, for me, whether people can prove that God exists or not is like no longer relevant. And when he said that, I was like, really? You're preaching all the time about proving God exists. He's like, no, it's irrelevant now. He said it would be like if somebody came to me and promised me that they could do an experiment to demonstrate to me that my wife does not exist. It is totally irrelevant because I've had so many experiences with my wife that there is no world in which I would believe that she didn't exist. And he said, and my relationship with God is the same way. I have got to the place where he said, you can focus on the apologetics, and that's great. You need that to get to where you need to go for it. But that doesn't matter to me anymore. And I thought about that a lot, and I think that that's a part of this process, right? People taste and see that the Lord is good, have those experiences, but you still are never really going to know it until you have the experience over the course of time, and then it becomes something that you can, treat as the anchor, and you can have those experiences, and you can then treat the gospel as the anchoring mechanism that you can measure. What about this ideology? What about this ideology? And what's wrong with that? But I think that experience with God, there's just no substitute for it. Anyway. Yep.
Yeah, I wanted to mention, because I was thinking about while you were speaking before about how the Bible can bring us together, whether we argue about its nuances or not, And I was just looking for that verse about how we shouldn't forsake the gathering ourselves together,
Hebrews
right?
10, 24 and 25.
And how if you take the Bible and you study it in your own little echo chamber and you try and figure it out, just you and your prayers, right? Then you're going to have all of these ideas that you're going to be convinced are true. But if you're going to church after studying the Bible, or you're gathering in a small group setting like this and you're studying the Bible together, and you go, well, this is my idea, and you get pushback on it, well, then you go, okay, well, maybe that wasn't right. And it's just important that we...
Oh, you call them heretics and leave the small group.
Yeah, or you're all wrong, and I'm going to worship by myself every week. No, it's a dangerous thing to do.
Yeah.
And I've seen it happen many times where people have gone, everyone in the church, they're wrong about it all, and I'm going to go and I'm going to
start my own.
I'm going to start my own. I'm going to do my own thing. I'm going to keep the Sabbath by myself. And what ends up happening is those ideas that you had that may have been wrong become more fortified in your own thinking, And so I just want to encourage gathering together with the believers, whether that's church, small groups, podcasts like this. Get together, study the word together, push back, throw out new ideas, study it together. It's the only way to reach the truth. And I think that there's nuances and difficult things to understand in the Bible for this reason, because God wants us to be studying it as groups, as fellow believers. He planted the church and then he left, right? He left us to run the church, and he left us to figure it out. He didn't plant the church and stay as our leader on earth for the entirety.
God is a delegator.
He's a delegator. That's right.
But he promises the Spirit to lead and guide us into all truth.
Yeah, exactly.
So we're not just blindly.
We're not by
trying
ourselves.
To guess what's right. Yeah.
That's right. But I'm saying like Jesus, the human. You know.
Mm-hmm.
But he deliberately made us reliant on each other.
Yeah.
That's the point I'm trying to make, and you just said it perfectly. Yeah. And the Bible isn't that easy to understand. It really isn't. You know, you can read it as a story and you're going to go, well, that was a great collection of stories. It didn't make any sense and I didn't get any powerful, thoughts that came jumping out at me. But there's a verse in Revelation talking about the number 666. And it says, here is wisdom, let men who have understanding calculate the number, you know. And he wants men of understanding and wise men to be diving into this book and figuring it out and sharing their findings with each other. So anyway.
Well, this has been a really great discussion. Pastor Luke, thank you so much for joining us for your first time, but hopefully not your last time with us.
No, I'll come back.
You come back. Yeah, we didn't scare you too much. This is good.
It's good fun.
So, but we will leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode. We look forward to catching you next time for the next one. God bless.
Thanks, guys.
I liked it.